And I'll take a couple of stops over the 20 minutes and we can hopefully do some questions. Obviously, it's really informal. So you can see my introduction there. You'll find me on LinkedIn mainly. That's where I post. I've got my own website, rominahennigan.com or rowremote.com as well. And my main motto for remote work is not a place. And for me, as I've gone through my remote work journey since 2007, and more recently since I started teaching and lecturing on the subject over the last sort of 5 years, it's really important to me because I'm quite an environmental advocate and activist to work in and integrate the theory of remote work and how it supports sustainability. So we're looking at the SDG number 8, or the Sustainable Development Goal number 8, from this overall slide here. And we're looking at how remote work can support decent work and economic growth. So I'll be looking at that during my presentation over these few minutes, but I'll be also touching on lots of these wider goals, which is really important as well, because sustainability and the purpose of these goals from the UN is that they're all interlinked in some way. So even though I'll be concentrating on the headings of creating and accessing decent work and supporting economic growth, I'll also be touching a little bit onto some of the other goals during these few minutes, because they're also interlinked. I'll talk about how remote work supports this, and I'll do it with some real life examples. Even the fact today, even though we're being forced to not leave home and remote work, how we're reducing our carbon footprint by not commuting to an event, right through to some personal examples of how remote work has supported sustainability. And then I'll move into a little Q&A. So some pictures of me. The one on the right is happier times when I had vistas. I haven't seen proper vistas in 16 days. That's at the Basilica in Zaragoza. That's me in my co-working space that I sometimes work in down the road here in the city. And during lockdown, I haven't been out to these places at all because we can only walk around mainly our block due to policing and state of emergency. So that was a nice reminder to how remote working has landed me in Spain, and I work completely remotely from here to international clients. And it gives you a little context to me as well, and the fact that I love to be out and about, particularly. That's me on my bike at the river, near the river. The Sustainable Development Goals. So I shared with you on chat a link to an article I wrote about how remote work supports sustainability. And I wrote that article about 9 months ago on request from an event called Nomad City. And Nomad City is an international remote work conference. And I did a keynote there in Gran Canaria. And I covered off about how sustainability and remote work are so interlinked. And during that, I did, on the run up to that event and preparing that keynote, I did 12 exploratory interviews using video chat, using what we're doing today, video calls. And I spoke to lots of different experts on the topic of sustainability and remote work. And that has laid the foundation, which is why I've shared it in the chat for this presentation today. So we look at socioeconomic benefits, and around the world, there are many experts that are looking at this, but teleworking, as it's known in the States, or remote work, can have many benefits on a country level and on a regional level. If we look wider around the world, it encourages geographic spread of wealth and access to different talents, okay? So a company can be set up that's remote, for example, and it can hire all over the world within reason, given a jurisdiction and hiring constraints. But with that in mind, and in particular, if we take into account freelancers like myself, which make up a big, I've started to make up a big portion of remote workers. If I choose to work remotely, I can choose to work from anywhere. Now we get this picture of a digital nomad. That's kind of picture of someone on the beach in Bali doing their work, right? And that's the pretty painted view. Some of you are smiling. It's actually really interesting to look at this more widely, because what it does is it spreads regional or economic spread, because it's not just those digital nomads, it's higher earners, it's people with flexibility who work remotely, and they move around and work from different places. Just like me moving from Ireland to Spain, or me choosing to go, for example, on holidays for a couple of months somewhere else in Spain, and then working and living from there for a couple of months if I wanted to. So it encourages that economic spread. It gives that flexibility of location, which can be sustainable to the individual if they need to move. So, for example, if they need to move from personal circumstances, or if they need to be homebound for personal circumstances. And we'll come on to that in a minute. It supports rural regeneration. You've had Rose on from Grow Remote out of Ireland originally, and now an international organisation. And Grow Remote supports that by supporting employment, both remote employment in Ireland. But I've given you two other examples. Sende.co, which you can look up, is a co-living and co-working, very innovative project on the border between Portugal and Spain. And it has rurally regenerated a tiny village in Spain of 8 inhabitants. And now for 9 months of the year, that village has up to 100 people in it, and everything in the co-working, co-living space is supported by the economics of that co-working, co-living space. Everything is sourced, and all those workers are individual remote workers like myself, mainly in the creative realm. Arranmore Island in Ireland as well is another example of that, where there's been co-working spaces set up, and hence there's been an attraction for workers to go there. So remote working and its infrastructure can help with rural regeneration. Also another example within I'm just checking the chat. So oh yeah, can people go on mute, because I can hear some noise there. Thanks for that. I was wondering if it was just me hearing that. La Colaboradora, which in Spanish means collaboration, it's a nice easy Spanish translation word, is a center here in Zaragoza, which is also a co-working enterprise center. But what's really interesting about that model as well, when I was doing my research, is they use a time bank for resources. And all the people who work there share their time amongst the other people. So a marketing person might help an accountancy person, etc. And by sharing those resources, it ends up that everyone's monthly fee for joining that center is less. You may have heard of Impact Hub Network as well, which is another part of the infrastructure of co-working and remote work worldwide. And they are a sustainable social business, the Impact Hub Network. You can find them, impacthub.org, I believe is the domain. And they are also supporting that, and they are worldwide. So there's lots of new business models. So I've spoken about this country and regional support, economic spread being supported, rural regeneration. We're also creating these new ways of working, these new models and this new support infrastructure. And that makes this remote working more sustainable, which therefore then again supports the socioeconomic benefit. Finally, on this slide is the diversity in who, where and what they can be hired for. Thanks, Porrick. I'm going to love Arranmore as well when I actually eventually get there. I've been dreaming of all these places. All I want to do is get out of my apartment at the moment. So thanks for that, Porrick. Beautiful place, and it has a fantastic co-working. So it might be something that someone might hope to go and live there, and you can work there as well. So that's one of the jewels in Grow Remote's crown, the Arranmore location. So let's move on in terms of the diversity of who, where, and when they can be hired. And I've limited time, and this is a whole topic in itself, but the types and scopes of role, given that they can be done remotely, and I'm not saying everything can, I'm not saying that, and thankfully, thank the cosmos, it can't, because I love that we've got flexibility and some people have to be manually in a place to do their work. But for some computer-based work, or the majority of it, it can be done from home when the setup is there or done remotely. And then that has started to be expanded into types and scopes of roles, but also these new business models, these new types of companies, 100% remote companies, and there's lots of them. If you Google or search 100% remote companies, I'm going to mention a couple in a minute. WordPress is built by Automatic with 2 T's at the end. There's 1,200 workers spread all over the world, totally remote. And what they have done is they're supporting this diversity and inclusion. I'll come back to that in 1 minute. So when I was doing my research for the presentation, for the keynote, the LinkedIn article I shared with you, I did some interviews, and I interviewed a US military veteran called Raul Rivera as part of that. And it was fascinating. He had broken his back in service in Afghanistan, and he was partially disabled, living in Alaska. And he told me his personal story of how remote work has changed his life because it enabled him to work from home. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, there is increasingly, and I'm in contact with a couple of people who are working for KPMG in the UK as well with similar examples, where they are being supported for partial homework, some of them full homework, some of them partial homework or remote work, because of their needs physically, okay? And that takes off a decent work that is accessible to all and expanding the scope and types of work for people. So I've given the example on there of Raul, the US military veteran. Tomorrow on this fantastic hackathon, you'll have Lorraine Charles from NAMAL. And NAMAL is an international organization that is giving refugees access to remote work as well. So refugees with a computer can access remote work and start earning. And for me, that is one of the simplest examples of diversity and inclusion and decent work access for all. Yes, I know they have to have the computer skills. Yes, I know there's some things there, but I do believe that it is starting to really influence these areas. So that's when we talk about decent work, there are some of the examples that I come up with. But I want to show you how it's underpinned by 100% remote companies leading the way, and people like myself who've been advocating for remote work for a long time. And the wonderful Tinternet, or internet, as some of you would like to call it, gave me some lovely example of this just before I came on this call. So I added it to my slides. So GitLab, which some of you may have heard of, they're another one of the leading 100% remote companies. This is the GitLab children's coloring book, which was released today by the GitLab staff who are now all homebound at the moment. And this is based, this coloring book, which is being supplied to all parents who have to homework, is now currently, it's a coloring book, right? And what we have is them using their key part of their value and their culture, diversity and inclusion, because GitLab has an open policy for recruitment. Within reason, if it can hire in your jurisdiction or country, you can apply. And GitLab is one of the 100% remote companies is also leading the way in blind testing of candidates, which means that they're more inclined to recruit people with things like disabilities or with certain potential challenges. So their approach and their culture is very, very strong and supports diversity and inclusion. And what other better way of illustrating this, that their on-the-fly created coloring book has this within it, which their parents from the company created, and this is one of the pages for it. So I thought that was a nice way of giving them a shout out and also illustrating that. So when we look up the dictionary definition of sustainability, I found one that says being held up from underneath, so supporting or sustaining. So when we look at the Sustainable Development Goal, number 8, that we wanted that remote work can provide decent, good quality work that can be socioeconomically sustainable. Now I'm going to go into the other reasons, some of the other reasons, and you could spend ages listing these, all right? So these are the further benefits, the associated benefits. And funnily enough, I haven't mentioned environment yet, a little bit at the start, but it's one of the biggest. All you have to do is have a look at the front page of any of the papers at the moment online that are grabbing for some positivity. I spoke to some friends in Italy, and it was really interesting to hear that they've got dolphins coming back into the harbour where they live for the first time in 20 years. So the decrease in our carbon footprint, with everyone now being forced, or many being forced to remote work, is one of the big benefits. Aligned with that, and I'm going to run through these quickly so we can do Q&A, is we've got this reduced physical office space and all associated infrastructure, so we've got lower overall costs and use of space. We've got remote workers tending to eat local and support local communities as they've been dispersed, therefore supporting that. One study out of America, which I haven't seen the full results, has found that remote worker families have better nutrition in total because they're supporting being able to cook at home and be at home rather than spending time commuting. And then usage in general. So I've got a tracksuit on at the bottom, guys, and I'm pointing at my nice top as I present to you. But I've been wearing that same tracksuit for 16 days. No, I have washed it. I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding. But one of the things that also is really interesting is you don't need as much formal clothes if you're not commuting, if you're moving around as much, okay? And there has been some look into that as well, that your general consumption has gone down in terms of that. And one step further, so I work for a social impact consultancy. It's one of the uh, uh, collaborations I'm on, and they're called Stone Soup Consulting. And they're a remote first company for 11 years. And they have added even stronger environmental support in there. So all of their 60 plus consultants worldwide are remote. But what they've done is they've even put into their staff policies reduce your use of lighting, use reducible bottles, buy second-hand office furniture, etc., etc. So they're even pushing that even more to get people that are already remote and reducing their carbon footprint to take that to the next step. So they're leading the way in always looking for ways that we can improve and sustain this sustainability supported from below. I want to finish with this because for me, it sums it up. Today, this is from Raoul directly. Today, right now, it would be physically and mentally difficult for me to hold a traditional job. I am 100% disabled veteran. I did not choose to break. So his first language is Spanish, and what he means by that is he did not choose to break his back in service in war. I do have a choice of how I keep myself together. Remote work is part of that glue. And he believes that for disabled veterans, it is a way to, their way into remote work is a way for them to work hard, live better, and contribute to their communities. So I'd like to finish on that as a personal statement from someone I interviewed to give you an idea of how remote work can provide that decent work that's sustainable. And I'm happy if we've time to take any questions on chat. Thank you for listening.